Hi everyone, had a little something to change before. I do hope you enjoyed your 4th of July, got over whatever accidents you've had with lighter fluid or with, fireworks, or of course getting arrested for drunken behavior. And, I know my audience, or if you just have like tremendous heartburn because, you ate too many chorizos or something. In any case, I want to go back to a person who I've followed for a while because he's incontrovertibly a complete jackass, and he should be run out of town. And I actually did a petition a long time ago, and I might reintroduce this petition to you guys to have Paul Krugman give back his Nobel Prize for economics. The man's an asshole, and he believes that for some reason, because he won that Nobel Prize, that suddenly everybody has to blow him or something. He basically goes on TV, whether it's on I think he's been on Bloomberg, and he's always on CNBC, and he's like, suck my dick. I won the Nobel Prize for economics years ago for something that has nothing to do with anything that's actually been accomplished. That's him, and he was. I'll tell you what. He might be one of those other people that, for some reason, both conservatives and progressives appear to hate. And the reason is that this is what he said back in April of 2016. He said, today's column offers an opportunity to say, for the record, why I haven't been the Bernie booster a lot of people apparently expected me to be. For the business about discounting Clinton support as coming from conservative states in the Deep South actually exemplifies the problem I saw in the Sanders campaign from the beginning and made me distrust both the movement and the man. Distrust both the movement and the man. What you see on this, is, as on multiple issues, is the casual adoption with no visible effort to check the premises of a storyline that sounds good. It's all about the big banks, single payer is there for the taking if only we want it. Government spending will yield huge payoffs, not the more modest payoffs conventional Keynesian analysis suggests. Because everybody has to be a fucking Keynesian, so you can't be anything besides a Keynesian. Republican support will vanish if we take on the corporate media. In each case, the story runs into big trouble if you do a bit of homework. If not completely wrong, it needs a lot of qualification, but the all-purpose response to anyone who raises questions is that she or he is a member of the establishment, personally corrupt, etc. Ad hominem attacks aren't a final line of defense. They're argument number one. He's being like really, somebody heard him in his fifis there because the Bernie people were attacking him because he's full of shit. It's not wrong for people to criticize Paul Krugman because the guy is full of shit. It doesn't matter if it's a Bernie person. It doesn't matter if it's somebody on the right like myself. I know some people think that I'm obsessing over trivial policy details, but they're missing the point. It's about an attitude, the sense that righteousness excuses you from the need for hard thinking, and that any questioning of the righteous is treason to the cause. When you see Sanders supporters going over the top about corporate whores and such, you're not seeing a mysterious intrusion of bad behavior into an idealistic movement. You're seeing an intolerance that was always just under the surface of the movement right from the start. Does Clinton have problems too? Of course. Of course! She's been too cozy with establishment interests in the past. She shouldn't have given those speeches, and of course she shouldn't have voted for the Iraq War, but there is no evidence that she's corrupt, and lots of evidence that she both thinks hard about issues and is willing to revise her views in the light of facts and experience. Those are important virtues, important in asterisk quotes, progressive virtues that seem woefully absent on the other side of the primary. But never mind, as you know, I'm only saying these things because I'm a corporate whore and want a job with Hillary. That's what he said in April 2016. Let me see if anybody else is... John Sislowski. Yeah, sorry. I had to restart. I am back though, so come back. So that was Paul Krugman a while ago, 2 years ago. And this is him today. He says radical Democrats are pretty reasonable. That's definitely a change in tone. He says Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's upset primary victory has produced a huge amount of punditry about the supposed radicalization of the Democratic Party. It's going to hurt the party because her positions won't sell in the Midwest. And how well would Steve King's positions sell in the sells in the Bronx? That's not the issue here though, because Steve King is not trying to run in the Bronx. And the fact is that we're still talking about different parts of the country that have different beliefs, and there's very little connection between them. It's clear that there's the coastal parts of the country that are very, very liberal, and then on the other hand, you happen to have some of these parts of the country like Kansas that are simply not. They're completely conservative. So here's what you should know. The policy ideas are definitely bold, and you can make some substantive arguments against them, but they aren't crazy. By contrast, the ideas of Tea Party Republicans are crazy. In fact, Ocasio-Cortez's policy positions are a lot more sensible than those of the Republican mainstream, let alone the GOP's more radical members. Since Ocasio-Cortez is being compared to Dave Brat, who unseated Eric Cantor, consider this. Brat favors a constitutional amendment forcing a balanced budget every year, which 96% of economists think this is a really bad idea. Well, Ocasio-Cortez supports democratic socialism, which the majority of Venezuelans don't support. That's by the way, a dig at somebody I just debated, who's, you know what they really think. Well, I think when they're leaving the country in droves, and there's over 1 million of them leaving the country in the past 2 years, I think I know what they want. When people are simply leaving paying jobs that basically, in the past, they brought you into the middle or upper middle class, like in Venezuela, oil company jobs. They're leaving them, basically abandoning them to go to another country like Colombia that used to be a war zone, and where they had their own refugee problem not long ago. I would say that people who are in touch with reality know that it's a bad idea. But okay, well, listen to your 96% of economists. Also, by the way, remember that the Republicans won big in the midterms that followed Cantor's demise. So, which I don't know what his point is. So about Ocasio-Cortez's positions, Medicare for all is a deliberately ambiguous phrase, but in practice probably wouldn't mean pushing everyone into a single-payer system. Instead, it would mean allowing individuals and employers to buy into Medicare. Basically, a big public option. That's really not radical at all. Well, this here is Paul Krugman extrapolating something that he doesn't know. He's assuming that Ocasio-Cortez's position is that single payer will not mean eliminating private insurance as an option. But if you really look at what they're talking about, most democratic socialists do believe that there should be no private insurance. There should be access for all and equal access for all. That's just a fact. Then you see here, and if we're talking economics rather than politics, every advanced country except America has some form of guaranteed health insurance. Decades of experience show that these systems are workable, and they all have lower costs than we do. Calling for us to do what everyone else has managed to do is perfectly reasonable. What about a jobs guarantee? Ocasio-Cortez's proposal can be thought of as a rise in the national minimum wage to $15, combined with a sort of public option for employment in case that wage rise leads either to private sector job losses or an increase in labor participation. Now there's a huge amount of evidence to the effect that minimum wage hikes don't significantly reduce employment. To be fair, however, $15 is outside the range of historical experience, and you make a plausible case that in low productivity regions like much of the South, there would be some job losses. On the other hand, those are precisely the regions that could use some aid. So he doesn't cite anything. He says there's a huge amount of evidence to the effect that minimum wage hikes don't significantly reduce employment. Well, when you see places like Seattle, that's exactly what has happened. You see people being basically either the company lays off employees, or some of these companies even go out of business. They don't remain open in that city. Just close this. So then he starts hedging his bets. He says, and even progressive economists like Josh Bivens aren't sure whether a job guarantee is a good idea, mainly because they wonder whether the government can figure out how to manage large numbers of workers hired under the program and are uncertain about the cost. For what it's worth, I'm pretty much with Bivens here, although I think he may be overstating the difficulties a bit. The goal of the jobs guarantee is laudable, but there are better ways to get there. So he's essentially avoiding admitting that the things that he used to criticize Bernie Sanders for, he now, to some degree, supports Ocasio-Cortez for. What changed? I mean, the policies are almost exactly the same between Bernie Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez. To my knowledge, there is no policy difference. And I could be wrong. Also, for what it's worth, estimates by the leading academic advocates of a jobs guarantee, Paul Krugman and Hamilton, say that it would be expensive, costing more than $500 billion a year, although they believe that part of this cost would be offset by lower spending on safety net programs and higher tax receipts. My own take is that they're both too optimistic and too pessimistic. I mean, what the fuck are you talking about? On one side, they believe that a huge number of people would enter the job force. That U6, the broadest measure of unemployment, would fall to just 1.5%, far below anything we've seen even at the peak of previous booms. My guess is that they're way too optimistic here, that many of those not working still wouldn't be working for a variety of reasons, even with a guaranteed job. But if fewer people than they think took these guaranteed jobs, the program's costs would be correspondingly lower. Say it only ended up costing half their projection, $270 billion a year. How irresponsible would that be? Okay, so basically what Paul Krugman is saying, let's do a guaranteed jobs program, but let's hope not too many people try to get into it so it doesn't waste as much money. Well, then therefore, are the jobs really as necessary as you think they are? Are we even talking about jobs that are necessary? Because there are a lot of people who work in the public sector today that basically polish helmets. That's all they do. It's like ridiculous that you're even talking about a federal jobs guarantee. You don't create jobs in order for the job to exist. A job exists when there's a necessity for a certain labor or service to be executed. Otherwise, there's no need for the job, and people get fired or laid off or whatever. That's the way the world works. And if you want to see countries where jobs exist that there's no service to be performed, you could probably go to some of these African countries that they have a bureaucracy that doesn't really function for the benefit of anything besides the bureaucracy. A lot of these countries around the world, especially in the third world, they do have a bureaucracy. Haiti, for example, has a bureaucracy. I don't think it's one of the largest in the world. But are those people actually providing services for the citizens? No, but they're cashing checks from the government. So if you laid those people off, do you think that the general population would notice that their that their standard of living has gone down? I don't think so, because the majority of the economy of Haiti has nothing to do with the official economy. It's probably all black market stuff and just people who, there's the informal sector of the economy. That's a fact. Okay, you can go around the world, go to any country in the world that is a third world country. Yeah, there's probably a large public sector or I don't know how large it would be, but the fact that it exists at all is no boon to the economy. You know, the economy kind of survives in spite of the public sector in most of these countries. So that was his article from I believe it was yesterday. Radical Democrats are pretty reasonable. Let me see. I think there was one paragraph left. Well, the Trump tax cut, according to the CBO, will increase the fiscal 2019 deficit by $280 billion, and it will do that while delivering little or nothing to working class families. Whether or not you support Ocasio-Cortez here, she's advocating a more responsible policy than that actually enacted by Republicans in Congress. Misspelled, by the way. The point in any case is that while a jobs guarantee is probably further than most Democrats, even in the progressive wing, are willing to go, it's a response to real problems, and it's not at all a crazy idea. So next time you hear someone on the right talk about the, quote, loony left or some centrist pundit pretend that people like Miss Ocasio-Cortez are the left equivalent of the Tea Party, ignore them. Radical Democrats are actually pretty reasonable. So we might actually have a live stream today with Alex Ioannidis, who, by the way, he wasn't overseas, but he was out of the country for a while. So I might create an event for that. But I want to finish. I do have some more stuff to go through before we get to that. Now, he's not the only person who's embracing Ocasio-Cortez from the establishment. This is Stephen Colbert.
My next guest shocked the Democratic Party with her primary victory on Tuesday night. She's now on track to become the youngest congresswoman in history. Please welcome Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Welcome to the show. I want to confess that I did not know your name on Monday.
Most people didn't.
But what is it like for you? Because this is your first election. Yeah. You unseated a 10-term congressman, Crowley, who many people had thrown out his name as the possible heir apparent for Nancy Pelosi's number 4 Democrat. 3 weeks before the election, the polls showed you 36 points behind him, and you won by 15 points. Yeah. That's 51. That's a 51.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're a very capable, intelligent person. Why do you think you were able to swing 51 points in 3 weeks and unseat this man who'd been there for 20 years?
Well, I think the first thing to kind of mention is that I don't think polling is always right.
We learned that in 2016. We learned that in 2016,
You know,
yes.
Polling, here's the big thing. Polling, people try to identify who is the most likely person to turn out. And what we did is that we changed who turns out. And that changes the whole election.
Well, who turned out? Who doesn't turn out? Who doesn't turn out, especially for Democratic primaries? And who turned out for you? Who are your constituents?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. We were about 8 minutes till the polls were closing, and I was in my home neighborhood in the Bronx, and these two young, BX, we got any BX out here? And it was 8 minutes till the polls closed, and these two, teenage-looking kids came up to me and was like, "We just voted for you." And I was like, "How old are you?" And they're like, 19. And I was like, 19 years old, voting in an off-year midterm primary election?
What is going through this? What is going through your head? Let's show you this clip right here. We've got a clip of the moment you found out you won. We don't have the sound on this, but just, there you are.
Yeah.
What's happening? What's going through your mind at that moment?
Well, it was so crazy because I had not checked any of the polls. I'm in the car on the way to this party, to the watch party. It was like an old billiards hall in the Bronx. I hadn't checked any of the polls in my phone, and then we get out, And I go, oh my God, outside, because I see all of these reporters like running to the watch party, and like nobody was there. It was our volunteers and our supporters and our organizers.
If you see reporters running towards you, it's either very good or very bad.
Yeah, exactly. So I see these reporters. I'm literally like racing these reporters into the billiards hall, and I run inside, and I just like run into this TV set, and I look up, and I see the margin, and then I see the amount of precincts reporting, and that's how I found out that we won the election, right there in that moment.
Now you have a good shot because it is a majority Democratic district, so there's a good shot that you're going to go to Congress, while not guaranteed. You said because you work in hospitals.
Okay, I'm sorry for my screen freezing, by the way, sometimes. I think I do have to do some memory clearing. Might as well do some of it tonight sometime. But so they were talking a lot about, how do you get all these people to come out to vote for you? Well, the total people who voted in that primary were 27,000 people. And I'll look it up. Let me see here. So the 14th congressional district, I think, had something like 700,000 residents or something. So hold on, bear with me for a second. So New York's 14th congressional district has a population of, let me see here. So in some of these elections, they actually have 200,000 voters come out. But in this primary, they had 27,000. Because the fact of the matter is that in the primaries, people simply don't come and show up. It still doesn't say how many residents are in here. But here you go. I'll show you the results here. This was in 2016, 197,000 people came out and voted. In 2014, 67,000. In 2012, 145,000. So obviously during a presidential election, there's a huge turnout. During a midterm election, to be honest with you, there doesn't seem to be that many people who show up and vote. So I have to tell you that I don't think that this is as big of a deal as people make it out to be. That's just my opinion on that. Sean Lankus, welcome back. I haven't seen you for a while. Less than 5% turnout is how she won. Yeah, well, she also won because Crowley was a pathetic loser and didn't even try to win. In previous elections, the only competition he faced was a conservative party, because, by the way, New York State has a conservative party. They don't just have a Republican party, they have a conservative party. So in 2014, they had just a conservative candidate ran against him. Then in the previous election, they had a guy won 15% to run against him. So it's not a very competitive district. And it's not a competitive district because a lot of these, and by the way, I think they redistricted it in 2012, so that they renumbered it for Crowley to take over or whatever. I think previous to that, he had been, that this was the 7th district before that. So what the hell does it matter? Let me see here. Getting messaged as well, so let me just hop over. So the real issue here is that it's a district with very low turnout anyway. And like I said earlier, there was a district here in South Carolina, the 1st district, where Katie Arrington got more voters put together than Ocasio-Cortez did. So let me see here. I might actually find out the 14th congressional district. I don't know how many residents it has, but let me see here. Yeah, I think that it's logically there would be more voters in Queens and the Bronx than there would be in South Carolina, in any of the districts in South Carolina. We're going to have Alex Ioannidis join us, so let me just call him up. Let me see here. How am I going to do this? So I'm going to have to expand this screen so you can't see shit. So you can see more of me. Doesn't that suck? I'm going to have to ask for his email. So I think Alex wants to talk about the Supreme Court. So those of you that don't remember, I think it's been a few months since he's been on. Alex goes to the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, and he's kind of one of these more Christian-y dudes. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Not nowadays, it used to be that if somebody was gay, you had to say nothing. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Now I guess it's if you're Christian. So, to continue with this stream was not supposed to go into other topics. It was really more about Paul Krugman. But the fact of the matter is that you have a lot of these people who, they previously didn't care about Ocasio-Cortez, or they didn't support Bernie Sanders. But instead of admitting that they were wrong, they just pretended for a while that they that they were staying true to their values. Now that Ocasio-Cortez is the sudden she's the hot ticket of the Democratic Party. They're very they're very hardcore about it. Suddenly they're like, well, Ocasio-Cortez, she's the new big thing. She's the next new flavor of the party. And by the way, it's not just Paul Krugman, okay? I'm sorry if I'm a little distracted. I'm just trying to coordinate with Alex to come back on. But look, to finish my point, you had in this other district, you had 65,000 voters showed up. That's more than twice as many as showed up in the case of Ocasio-Cortez's district in New York. So you had a total of 27,000 votes. So, there's a difference in enthusiasm, and clearly Ocasio-Cortez took advantage of it in order to win her own primary. And that's Joe Crowley's problem. That's a problem of the Democrats. Let me just check that. I need to check that Alex got my invite. All right, so who else has called and tried to make, try to make amends for it? Now, first we'll examine Krugman's own criticism of Bernie Sanders from 2016. I forgot to play this clip.
Criticizing Bernie Sanders, which has surprised many of your passionate devotees. What is wrong with Sanders in your view? Why are you so critical of what he's doing and what he's still doing?
Okay, so first, and I guess the obligatory disclaimer. I mean, given
I'm not asking you to endorse anyone. I'm trying to explain to you why you're anti-endorsing someone.
Right, and there's nothing, right? Sanders versus Trump would not be a hard decision to make, let's say. But so a lot of people assumed that because I'm very much a liberal, that I would go for the candidate who was the most liberal sounding in the primary.
Yeah, a lot of people would assume that you would go with the person who most most approximates the values that you used to believe in, but instead you supported somebody who doesn't.
The trouble is, there's something that's from my point of view. It's not just a matter of liberal good, conservative bad. It's also careful, hard thinking good, facing up to hard choices good, wishful thinking, fantasy bad, and from the beginning it was kind of obvious to me, and I think it became even more clear over time that the Sanders campaign was really animated by the belief that being on the right side excused you from really having to do hard thinking. That if you said Wall Street is bad and the big banks are bad, that excused you from asking, well, what exactly does financial reform have to do? What did go wrong in 2008? And if you looked at that hard, it wasn't just the big banks. If you ask what kind of healthcare system should we have, well, everybody I know in the healthcare field who wants reform would go for single payer, would go for a Medicare type system for everybody. But the question is not, is that what you want, but what do you think you can actually do? What do you think can happen? So there was a lot of cutting of corners on the part of the Sanders campaign and the Sanders supporters, but let's just focus on the campaign. And a general tendency to say, well, if you're not with us, that must be because you're corrupted. And that's not the kind of thing I like to associate myself with. So I found it pretty upsetting. And then in the course of the campaign, of the primary campaign, there was a fair bit of just sniping at Hillary Clinton, who is far from perfect on many fronts, but is also overwhelmingly likely to be the Democratic nominee. And at some point, you have to ask: at what point are you realistically advancing your cause, and at what point are you increasing the chance that someone really, really bad is going to be in the White House?
So I guess in essence, you do have to admit that he was to some degree correct that as a result of the disunity in the Democratic Party, Donald Trump did end up succeeding in peeling away a number of Bernie Sanders voters. Probably not the majority. I think the figure that I've heard is 18% of Bernie Sanders primary voters voted for Donald Trump. So that's not a tiny margin, but it's not the majority of Bernie Sanders supporters, of course, because it's only 18%. But people have to remember that one of the reasons that the Bernie Sanders people did not embrace Hillary Clinton was because of this type of relationship where they were called people who are not hard thinking by the Democratic Party, by the establishment, who themselves aren't very hard thinking. So it was like the pot calling the kettle black. There were people who had been told for years, oh, just make do with the turd sandwich and the giant douche, as they say on South Park. So, people decided, well, I'm either not going to vote, or I'm going to vote for Jill Stein, or I'm going to vote for Gary Johnson, or I'm going to vote for Donald Trump. And then that kind of whittled down the Democratic coalition. And now, because of the recognition that they can't get away from it anymore, you have people like Tom Perez who are, so to speak, embracing Ocasio-Cortez. So it's not just Krugman, it's other people as well. Okay. So, all right. So, see there. I just had to invite Alex again. So we might change topics soon once we get Alex on. But I'm going to play the Tom Perez clip from the Bill Press show. This kind of made a few waves on the progressive side as well.
you've let us know loudly and clearly
All right. Now,
about.
something else happened last week. There was a primary in several states. Your state, home state of Maryland, and also up in New York, where the fourth most powerful Democrat in the United States Congress, Congressman Joe Crowley, was knocked out by a young woman, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, 28 years old, never ran for office before. Big progressive, calls herself a Democratic socialist, actually, like Bernie Sanders did. She was a Bernie Sanders supporter. And in Maryland, Ben Jealous, another strong progressive, wins the Democratic nomination for governor. What's this tell you about where the Democratic...
Sorry, it's going to have to reload. So, see if I'll put it up on YouTube.
Where the Democratic Party's going today?
Well, my daughters, I have 3 kids, 2 of whom are daughters. One just graduated college, one is in college, and they were both texting me about their excitement over Alexandria because she represents the future of our party. She ran a spirited campaign. I have great respect for Joe Crowley. Joe Crowley is a good Democrat. He was one of the sponsors of the Medicare for All bill. He's fought the good fight. And he when he realized he wasn't going to win, he exited with such dignity. Got on his guitar and played Born to Run as a tribute to Alexandria. I was out stumping last weekend for Ben Jealous. We had a unity event in Maryland. Ben, there's 24 counties in Maryland. Ben won 22 out of the 24 counties.
Wow.
And the 2 counties that he didn't win, he will win overwhelmingly in November. People say that you can't win the election in Maryland because we have a popular governor. That is bunk. In 2006, there was one and only one incumbent governor in the United States that got defeated. It was in Maryland. And he had
Bob Ehrlich, right?
It was Bob Ehrlich, and he had a very high approval rating, and he was taken down because elections aren't about whether someone likes you. They're about whether people like what you've been doing for them or to them. And, you look at job creation in Virginia versus Maryland. 7 times as many jobs were created in Virginia than Maryland last year, and it's something like twice as many this year. Ben is fighting for good jobs. He's fighting for access to health care. He's fighting for education for all.
So essentially what Tom Perez is saying here is that it doesn't really matter if a governor is popular. It really matters what they're doing to the constituents. And I do understand what he means by that. And I'm just being fair to Tom Perez, who I often make fun of because he does look hideous and acts like a complete asshole. But he makes a valid point there. The fact is, though, that, yes, Bob Ehrlichman lost, or I think it was Bob Ehrlichman was that guy's name. He lost that election. Who came in as governor? It was Martin O'Malley. Well, Martin O'Malley was governor during he'd been the mayor of Baltimore. Baltimore is a shithole, by the way. No offense to the people from there. I like people from Baltimore. I'm just saying that the city itself as a whole. There's good cultural things there, but let's be honest. You probably feel safer if in a couple counties away. So, if you're from Maryland, I have nothing against you. It's not those like people from New Jersey that I'd say like 99% of them, they can go fuck themselves. But sorry guys, I always have to beat up on New Jersey. But Maryland had a governor after Ehrlichman, Martin O'Malley, who was a complete loser. And, all these things that had happened under him, for example, the Freddie Gray thing happened in Maryland under him. And think about it that way. You have, I think it was under Martin O'Malley. It could have been somewhat after him. It might be that, no, yeah, it was under his successor, Larry Hogan. But the point being, the mayor, the governor of Maryland has to be somebody that brings the state forward if you're talking about improvements. And if Martin O'Malley brought it to such a high point, then how come, it's still one of the poorest states in the union in terms of at least the Baltimore area. you have a lot of the state is dependent on Washington D.C. That would be I think Prince George's and Montgomery County. Those are parts of the state that are very dependent on Washington D.C. So there's people who they have jobs that are created in a different state. They're basically people who live in order to commute to D.C. and then go back to Maryland. So you have a very, very rich area being Maryland, being Prince George's County and Montgomery County, places like Silver Spring and Bethesda and whatever. I think that so far as I know, they're much more rich than the Washington D.C. area. Meanwhile, the largest city in the state, Baltimore, is basically a free fire zone for gang members, and people just get shot left and right. It has nothing to do with the governor. So Martin O'Malley did nothing to change that when he was the mayor, and he did nothing to change that when he was the governor. The whole thing was just, it's a charade, and the Democrats know that it's a charade. So therefore, when you have Ben Jealous running for governor of Maryland saying, we're going to restore justice to the state or whatever, well, the Democrats control virtually every office in the state besides the governor. I think that they have a huge majority in the House of Delegates over there, which I know in Maryland it's called the House of Delegates. So what are you talking about?
Excited about. I think we can score an upset there. Alexandria's victory was just a remarkable reminder of the depth that we have in the Democratic Party, and what Alexandria has in common with people like Connor Lamb, who also won an upset victory, is that they're fighting for the issues that their constituents care most about. Connor was fighting for the right to organize. He was fighting for pension security. He was fighting for health care. Health care was the number one issue then. It's the number one issue now. And we are recruiting spectacular candidates across the country for races up and down the ballot who are fighting for the issues that are core to who we are as not just Democrats, but I think as Americans.
I'm a Maryland voter. I have a lot of people that I talk to about the governor's race, and it's what you just said. It is an uphill battle for Ben Jealous. But as I pointed out, there were no more uphill battles. It's not more of an uphill battle than the one that we were just talking about with Ocasio-Cortez. Like, no one thought she had a shot.
Right.
And we've never... It's been a while since we've seen Democrats run this way, in the way that she ran and the way that Ben Jealous is running. I mean, he's went out there and just said, Medicare for all. Everyone gets health care. I mean, he's really going out there. So we haven't quite seen a campaign like this in a while.
And we haven't seen the energy. In a long time.
Bill, I think you've put your finger on it there. Why have we been winning? We've had 43 races that we've won where we've flipped a seat, a state legislative seat, 43 from red to blue. And as you know, they're in areas where Trump won by 20, 25, and some cases more. And we're doing it with a very similar formula. We field great candidates. Candidate quality matters. Doug Jones is a spectacular candidate. Or organizing.
Yeah, I think with this type of clip, and we're going to call Alex in a second because he's kind of itching to get on. So he really shows that the Democratic Party has no core issues, okay? Because when you talk about Connor Lamb, this was a guy who did not he campaigned in a more rural area of Pennsylvania that was kind of it had gone for Trump. However, Connor Lamb campaigned with a lot of pro-gun values. He was a very centrist Democrat, very different from what Tom Perez is talking about when he means Ocasio-Cortez. If you look at the positions of Ocasio-Cortez and Connor Lamb, you'd have to you'd sometimes wonder if it's the same party. Look at Doug Jones down in Alabama. Since he became a senator, he's voted repeatedly in favor of some of these bills that have deregulated Wall Street. So Tom Perez of course, he's excited for this because for Tom Perez, it doesn't matter. The only thing that he's accountable for is that Democrats do get elected. It does not matter what they do when they get elected into office. And I think that's one of the reasons that you will see that. I mean, look, I'm not going to cast aspersions on Ocasio-Cortez I don't know her. I'm probably never, I hope I never have to live in her district, which is, I've seen it. Some people say that her district is kind of a hole. You know, it's still not New Jersey. But I just have to say this, okay? There's a high chance that if she gets elected, which she probably will be, the Democrats will find some way to co-opt her and force her into some sort of, deal with the devil. I'm just going to say it that way. They're going to try to get their hooks in her and go after her as if she's, basically red meat. Let's see this. I'm just closing some windows, see if I can get some free memory here. Got to get rid of this. There you go. A little more memory free. What else can we close here? I actually don't have that many windows open. So let me go to the chat and then we're going to call Alex. We have here Bodymore, Murderland. Yeah, I mean, look. I have nothing against the people who live there. Of course, I don't wish people to die in Maryland, but it's, Baltimore is a shithole. And people should stop pretending that, the Democrats are you're gonna represent people a lot better because, we're here to give Medicaid. Yeah, you give Medicaid for all because people are, of course, when you have a city where people get shot all the time, I guess, and there's no accountability for that, you would hope that the city can then I guess take care of these gunshot wound victims. It's ridiculous. And by the way, I think Maryland is it's a nationwide Baltimore is the nation's leader in murders per capita. I think it's either Baltimore or St. Louis. It's not Chicago. Chicago has more murders, period, but they don't have more murders per capita, so far as I know. About to call Alex. So I might want to get my headphones out. Let's see here. He didn't answer. Oh, he says he's too tired. What the fuck? All right, here we go.
Hey, man.
Okay, so we have a 4th of July guest. The sexiest man from since Giannis Antetokounmpo. We have Alex Ioannidis. He's back. Let me just make sure that you guys can see him because let's see here. Gotta get
I've been out in the rain. That's why my shirt's like this.
I actually can't see you. One second.
Oh.
Or you can't. You probably can't see me either.
I can't see you.
Yeah, let me get rid of my camera here, and I'm sure this is riveting video and audio right now, just me and you screwing around. But I did want to ask you. I know you were out of the country for a while. Could you please tell us what was your experience?
Man, pretty cool. I was in Greece. Met some cool refugees from Syria, Afghanistan, and a lot of them were Kurdish too. So they were from the whole region of Kurdistan, Iraq, Turkey, everywhere. But I also met guys from the DRC in Africa, of all places. So I thought that was really cool.
And you said you're going to go to another country also. You said you're going to go to Guatemala, I think.
Guatemala. I did that 3 weeks ago.
So how was that?
It was awesome. Took water filters to people. I met a kid in Kubulco who he got pulled over in Georgia and then got deported because he was undocumented. It was really sad. He had been there for 10 years.
So you got deported from where?
From Georgia.
Georgia in the United States, not Georgia in Russia, right?
Yeah, in the U.S. He was in the States for over 10 years. That was a huge highlight to me. So that really hurt.
So he'd been there, and he like what age is he now?
Like 20, 21, something like that.
So you said for like 12 years. Okay.
Outside Atlanta. Not too far from me, actually.
And were you there during the whole volcanic eruption?
I was. So we were driving back to the city when that happened, and the city's about 6 hours from where we were, and we didn't think much of it. They just said, "Hey, a volcano erupted," and we get out, and there's volcanic ash all over the car, and they closed the airport. So it turned out to be a lot worse than we thought.
So 1 second. This is. Hold on. Let me just adjust this window here. Okay, so I think people can see the top of your, or the bottom of your head, so that's good enough. So you are wearing the Make America Great Again hat, but you're aware that while you were out of the country, there was a whole simmering immigration controversy, correct?
Oh, I've been following it.
So what's your position on this, given the person that you met in where were you? Guatemala City or over in what's the other city over there?
Kubulco was where I was, but we did spend a few days in the city.
So, what's your perception? Do you think that this is a correct course of action on the Trump administration to continue to deport people from the U.S.? I know that you have a position that we should accept more people, but I'm assuming that there's deep poverty in Guatemala anyway. So how are we going to determine how many people we can accept from there?
No, I don't even think, I don't care if we accept more people or not. I'm more indifferent to it. I think I'm like a lot of people. We want to show compassion to the people here. And by that, I mean just I want them to be able to become permanent residents because they are still illegal. So you don't reward them with citizenship, but you also don't kick them out if they're being productive members of society. Like this guy I met had a job. He wasn't like a member of MS-13. If you're a member of MS-13, you should be deported, sent back home. And I think that should go with securing the border. It's a very compromised type of position. So it's a very that's the idea I have. That's the idea I think most people in this country have, really, because most people in this country want a secure border, but most people in this country don't just want to throw everybody out either.
So we were just talking about and I know you want to talk about the Supreme Court, so I'll just ask you a couple questions before we get to that. This Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez got nominated in New York City for Congress, and you yourself used to be a Bernie Sanders supporter. You're not one anymore. I don't know if you have a preferred candidate anymore. I don't think you've told me, but except for John Kasich. But what's your perception of this? Do you think that you live in Tennessee? Do you think that there's any enthusiasm for a person who's a democratic socialist in your district?
In my district, no, they'd get their butts kicked. I actually have one running for Congress. She's going to probably become the Democratic nominee for Tennessee's 3rd district. But last time the Republican got 66% of the vote here, he'll probably get about around the same, in the low to mid 60s. So no, I doubt that. But with Ocasio-Cortez, man, I think there's a lot of enthusiasm, and it's terrifying because she sounds just like I did when I was young and stupid.
Well, I think you're still younger than her. So in any case, there's like a big controversy at the moment because she happens to be, claiming that she's from the Bronx. However, a lot of media accounts claim that she's actually from Westchester County.
Yes, I did some research on that. She moved out of the Bronx when she was 5, and she grew up in Westchester County, one of the wealthiest and most privileged, quote unquote, zip codes in the entire country.
Yeah, I actually had a school friend who was from Westchester County, and it's exactly as you describe it, as one of the more wealthy counties in New York State. Do you think, being as you are from a red district, but Chattanooga is not exactly the wealthiest district in the country, but it's not the poorest district. Do you think it's legitimate for somebody like her to represent herself as the hope for a poorer part of New York City, like the Bronx and part of Queens?
Well, look, Democrats are definitely winning the PR war when it comes to this, I think. So it's like Democrats are seen as the party who cares about the poor. Even if you look at exit polls, like it will ask people what matters most to you in a candidate, and about 30 to 40% will say cares about me. And all of those people, like the Democrats, win those votes. Trump actually did better in that category than most, if not all, Republicans have done recently. They just sell their message better. So that you have to win the PR war and the culture war, and that's what I've really been trying to do, because you still see me addressing the same issues I did when I was a socialist. I just address it with a different solution as I read up more on it. It's pretty evident that the free market will do way more to help people than socialism will.
Well, okay, so I think that with Ocasio-Cortez, I think that it is backfiring to a degree for the Democrats, because there's an issue where people are starting to see that, she's getting overexposed. She was on, what's that show? Late show with Stephen Colbert. She was, now establishment Democrats are pretty much, singing her praises. Like earlier in the program, I was talking about Paul Krugman, who I personally consider, the grand turd of America. And there's also Tom Perez, the chief, the
DNC.
The DNC chair. He also said that she's the future of the Democratic Party. So I personally see that the more these people embrace her, unfortunately, this is not her fault. She's going to be tainted with the Tom Perez taint, the bald, ugly guy taint. Do you think that this is possible, or do you think that it's, I'm kind of reading too much into it?
No, I think she is the future of the Democratic Party, which is scary, because if these guys form something equivalent to the Freedom Caucus, and they force the Democratic Party to go left at every turn, especially if they take back the House, that's going to be frightening. At the same time, I really hope Democrats run more candidates like her, because they're going to lose big time, at least in the near future.
Well, yeah, I think based on, I live in Ohio. We have a guy running for governor who's a complete piece of shit.
Cordray?
Yeah, that guy is like a moron. I actually would have preferred Kucinich, because Kucinich actually has some honesty in him, whereas Cordray is just like Elizabeth Warren's poodle. So I might actually have to vote this year, which I'm not happy about. And thank you, Richard Cordray.
I'd Sherrod Brown out of office too. Get some conservative justices in the court.
Well, I've never liked him either. It's just Cordray is like a piece of shit. So
well, have you looked at the constitutionality of the CFPB that he ran?
That's actually why I heard that. So let me explain to you. I know a person, and I'm not going to share too many details, but he works for a business that was victimized, not victimized literally, but legally harassed by the CFPB. So they explained to me that they're a shakedown bureau of the government. But go ahead. What were you going to say about it?
Well, this is the thing with Cordray. When I see him, I never thought I'd support Mike DeWine for anything. But then Cordray comes around, and I'm like, all right, you need to win this race. But more importantly, the CFPB has basically brought unchecked power. Not even Congress can do that much investigating into them. And you saw the fight they gave Mick Mulvaney. Thankfully, the court sided with him when he decided to take over the agency. But what was one of the rules? You can't fire the leader of the CFPB, and he or she is supposed to have a 5-year term. and you can't fire them unless like they specifically violate like a protocol or a law. It's insane. Like Trump can't say, okay, I want to appoint my own director to this. You have to wait for a 5-year term. They get they get their own money. How do they get funded? Was it through the Fed, or was it like it wasn't like Congress appropriates money to them? They get money.
I think you're right. They were like a weird exception, and it's good you're bringing this up, Alex. I'm glad you came on today. By the way, Alex was in Guatemala recently. Guatemala, the second best country in the world after
the
Mexico.
USA.
Mexico. So
no. I like Guatemala's president. He's cool.
I'm just trolling you, buddy. Yeah, I heard he's a normal guy, but in any case, I do like it that you did bring this up with the CFPB. I think that they were funded. You know, there are certain agencies in the U.S. federal government that don't fall under a department, and therefore, you know, Congress, I guess, has to fund them directly, and there's no oversight over them. They're not accountable at the cabinet level, and you know, it's not right. You know, I was talking to Gary Byrne of the Secret Service a couple months ago. I think it might have just been in May. And, you know, we're talking about how there's too many federal law enforcement agencies. And he's like, yeah, you know, I mean, I used to be in the Secret Service. I'm like, yeah, there seems to be too many law enforcement agencies on the federal level. And some of them don't really fit into any department. Anything else before we talk about the Supreme Court?
Oh, look, I think Democrats want even more agencies like the CFPB, and they want bigger government agencies. That's how it's. What Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I heard her mention something about giving government jobs to everyone who can find a private sector one. And it's like, that's what they want to do. They want more agencies in D.C. Then the people who work at those agencies all move to Northern Virginia, and they keep turning that state blue. So there's that.
Yeah, there's like a real issue with, you know, like
drain the swamp, just cut their funding, starve the beast. That's how you do it.
Yeah, I think like you said, the Democrats do want to grow the federal government to such a degree that it basically becomes its own separate economy, even more than it is. I mean, it already is that way, and they would like it to keep it that way, and that's why, you know, Trump signed a bill that made it easier to fire federal workers. You know, I think he signed the VA Accountability Act. So, you know, these are things that I think were a long time coming, and you know, people's heads are exploding over it. Not so much the VA aspect, but the whole aspect of him, you know, just doing away with a lot of the things that were considered, oh, these are sacred cows of the federal government. Well, I just slaughtered your sacred cow. Now, you have the retirement of what's the guy's name? Anthony Kennedy, the Supreme Court justice. Now, you, of course, you're a business student, right? You're a major. Yeah. So, you know, we're talking about the Supreme Court. It decides often just cases that are related to mundane topics that are not exactly of public interest. You know, some of them are like, you know, commercial law that a lot of people don't understand. Then again, last week, of course, there was a law where they you know, there was NIFLA versus Becerra, which was about non-abortion family planning clinics that, you know, they decided against the state of California and in favor of these clinics, saying, well, you can't be forced to tell people where to have an abortion. They did the Janus decision against compelling people to pay union dues if they're not members.
The Democratic fundraiser coffers are about to shrink big time.
Right, and yeah, that is a huge concern for them, and I think they're right to be worried. I don't think that they're right to object to this judgment, because I think the judgment is consistent with the way I think of freedom of speech. Now, of course, Kennedy is resigning. Some people, you know, the day he resigned, they said, well, fuck you, you should have died or something, and there were all these mean tweets about him. And, you know, people are really freaking out over the Supreme Court after years where they don't care. So my question to you, Alex, you know, we do know where you stand on a number of issues. What's important for you when you're talking about a justice of the Supreme Court?
Man, You probably expect me to say abortion, and yeah, that is probably the biggest specific issue. I'm very pro-life, but even more important is that the Supreme Court does what they were supposed to do, which is be originalist. You're supposed to read the Constitution and decide if something is constitutional or not. You're not supposed to be an activist from the bench. That's the most important thing. And I want an originalist in the mold of Antonin Scalia, Neil Gorsuch, or Clarence Thomas. Even Alito and Roberts are good, but like the three I mentioned were the most originalists you'll see.
Right, but I think that there are certain areas where the Constitution does not address certain issues. For example, obscenity laws. I think that there were rulings where the Supreme Court kind of ruled that obscenity is not protected by the Constitution. I can't think of them off the top of my head, and we're not in a debate here. But I would say, originalism, I think, it's a valid way to look at the Constitution. And then the other approach, of course, are the loose constructionists, the activist judges, they're usually called. And I don't really agree with them too much at all. But I wouldn't consider myself an originalist because I think, yes, I do believe in a lot of things originalists say, such as, you should stick to the spirit of the original founding fathers. However, you also have to recognize that the most important aspect of a Supreme Court judge, and that's why I disagree with the federal judges, is that they should rule based on what the law does say instead of on their personal opinions and values. So while I don't necessarily say, it's written here that, for example, there was the 3/5 compromise back in the day. So I would say that a judge back in the 1800s could have possibly helped avert the Civil War if they would have been a little more of an activist judge in that respect, or shown a way constitutionally where that actually does violate the civil right, the constitutional rights of those people who were slaves. However,
it's funny you say that. I would like to comment on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned an activist judge. Have you, by any chance, ever read the majority opinion in Dred Scott v. Sanford?
No.
Basically, this is a summary of it. Was that he decided, the 7 judges that ruled for the slave owner in this case, because Dred Scott was a runaway slave, and they were deciding if he could be free or not because he ran away to Minnesota, I believe. And they were sitting there and talking about that. In their opinion, they write that Dred Scott was not a person, and that the right to property shouldn't have been infringed upon like that. And because Dred Scott was property and not a person, he wasn't a free slave. He wasn't a free man. He was supposed to be a slave. Now, the Constitution is pretty clear, the rights it guarantees to people, specifically the Bill of Rights. The part that defined Dred Scott as property, though, and not as a human being, that was activism on behalf of the court.
So you are saying that was an activist extrapolation of the definition of a human being as opposed to property.
Yeah, they defined what a property was and what a person was. And it's pretty obvious that Dred Scott was a human being.
Right, and I think that, unfortunately, we do see that because of the prejudices, the judicial prejudices, not just the racial prejudices, because, let's accept that there was racism on the Supreme Court way after slavery ended. I mean, forget about it.
Yeah.
But hold on. So their judicial prejudice was, in many ways, it was what enabled slavery to continue. And what you're saying is that their activism, their judicial activism in redefining what a person was, enabled slavery to continue. But the fact of the matter is that we did end up needing a constitutional amendment to officially end slavery, to ban slavery in the United States. We needed the 13th Amendment. So I don't think this is what I'm trying to say, that it's not enough to have a Supreme Court judge. You also have to have the other branches of government have to have the real motivation and guidance in their lives to do what is, the proper, the proper course of action for everybody, for the citizens at large, the broader public. So
Well,
I would say that I would hope that we have a Supreme Court judge that's not like a fanatical originalist, but I definitely don't want an activist judge.
and if there's something blank that the Constitution doesn't talk about, that's why you have the 10th Amendment. So that should go back to the states in itself. And if you want the Constitution to support some kind of activism, you amend the Constitution, which is what they did with the slavery. It's what they did with alcohol. They amended it twice. But think about it: if was it the 21st or the 22nd that repealed the one that
21st,
prohibited?
yeah, it repealed the 18th Amendment.
So if the 21st Amendment had never happened and we had the 18th Amendment, then you would have the Supreme Court making sure that alcohol wasn't legal. And like that in itself, like, you don't have to have activism. The activism was where you amended the Constitution. So if you want the court to fight for a specific value, amend the Constitution. That's what you're supposed to do. You're not supposed to say, for example, in Roe v. Wade's case, abortion needs to be legal everywhere, or same-sex marriage needs to be legal everywhere. Like, that's for the states to decide. It's not for 5 judges to say, yeah, we need to do this.
Well, I would say, this is, me, I'm religious, but I'm not I do believe in separation of church.
It can work this way with any
What's that?
situation. Those are just 2 examples. It doesn't have to be
right.
moral.
But I'm expanding on this. So I'm also religious like yourself. I am pro-life, probably not as pro-life as you are. I'm also, I'm against gay marriage because I think marriage as a whole is kind of a joke, partially because of gay marriage. But the thing is that if people really believed that gay marriage was what was right for the country, they would have voted for it in any of the referendums where, especially in California, where it was up for ballot. I think there were only a handful of states. One of them was Minnesota, where it was approved. And you know what? If the people of Minnesota wanted it, I was fine with that happening. Then there was the Defense of Marriage Act that Congress passed, but it doesn't have the strength of an amendment. You know what I'm saying? So unfortunately, those people who or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, I'm just trying to be objective here. The people who wanted to defend the institution of marriage as they wanted it, they did not have enough of a majority to pass an amendment that would say, well, we define marriage as between one, as a heterosexual marriage. Sorry, I can't say that word. I've been listening to that, what's it called, Tim Pool most of the day. So, it would have been helpful if they would have really thought about it and passed not just an act, passed an amendment, but instead, they left it up to the Supreme Court to decide it, and they said, well, it's not constitutional. I think that it was the wrong way to protect marriage. It was also the wrong way to legalize gay marriage because, in the end, I think it's empirically provable that the majority of Americans did not vote for gay marriage in any of the contests where it was up for ballot. Most of the contests, not any of them. But then, in terms of abortion, if they want to, they could try to pass an amendment that says, well, a woman has the right to choose whether a fetus is able to live, fetus, baby. Mm-hmm. I don't think that they would win. And it's the fact of the matter is, in the majority of these states, you go to a state like Oklahoma or a state like, even a lot of the states that you would think are progressive, like,
New Jersey.
Maine. I don't think that there's as much of a support for abortion as people think, because the abortion movement has gone really far off the cliff. And I also would not be in support of banning abortion entirely. I just don't want the federal government to fund it. So what do you think personally is the role of the Supreme Court in that debate?
I think, as I said earlier, the Supreme Court needs to, if it's not addressed, by the Constitution, they need to leave it up to the states. And it's funny you say this too. I was reading the literature from the Obergefell v. Hodges case, and I read all of the judges basically said the same thing when they added their commentary from the minority opinion. Roberts said this, Alito said this, Thomas said this, and Scalia all said this. I think Scalia wrote the opinion, if I recall it correctly. But they all basically said that if this passes, 5 judges are going to decide marriage policy for 50 states when over 30 of them haven't approved of gay marriage, like you said. And like California, it didn't pass. Proposition 8, it didn't happen. In Maryland, question 6 passed with like 2 or 3 points. It was very close. In Massachusetts, the state legislature did it. There are ways
so
to
what happened in Maryland? Did they vote for gay marriage or against it?
In Maryland, it went to a referendum and it passed with it was within 5 points. It was a very close referendum. But
right, I also know that I think in Minnesota they passed a referendum that said that they would legalize it.
Okay, so that's the other thing I'm saying. If you want to live in a state that allows gay marriage, move to Maryland, move to Minnesota. If you want to live in a state with more traditional marriagey, move to Tennessee. Move to Alabama. 51% of Alabamans, according to a poll last year, still believe that it should be illegal.
So I think you're a bit you're exaggerating a bit. I don't think that people should be forced to move based on whether they agree with same-sex marriage or not. I think people that are so committed to such an issue, to be honest with you, what really changes when gay people can get married? Well, they can also get divorced, and they can also, lose their passion for each other, which is pretty funny. But I think that in reality, a lot of their fight was about getting, the rights to, the same rights as heterosexual couples in terms of, I think, hospital visitation rights, as well as, getting benefits of spousal benefits and insurance and whatever. I think that those things, you don't have to have the institution of marriage changed in order to do that. And I probably would have voted no because, I don't care. Like, people are standing up and saying, oh, you're keeping all of our rights away from us. I'm saying, well, you don't have to redefine something that's existed forever in order to extend certain rights to people that I don't care about. That's because I'm just a douche. But that it has nothing to do with religion. It's the fact that I know what marriage is, and I don't think that they have to teach me anything. What about you?
Yeah. Well, that's what so many gay marriage opponents believe. It's not like, oh, we want to deny gay people equal rights. Very few people believe that. It's more like, oh, we want to keep marriage as a definition between one man and one woman, because for a lot of them, myself included, this is where I come from. To me, marriage was created by God in the Garden of Eden for one man and one woman. And if you make the definition of it expandable, then somebody can say, well, I want to marry multiple people and have it as one marriage. And it throws the definition of marriage up in the air. But if you're going to do that, back to the Supreme Court, 5 justices who are activists shouldn't decide that. Let the state legislators and the voters decide that, not the judges.
Right. I think this is one of the areas where, you and we do disagree on a lot of things, and we both know that. I mean, my religion as well agrees with what your religion says. And I think the majority of people that realize that it is, the fact that, and also, remember, Alex, you were probably, now you are, 23 years old? So, what?
I'm 20.
Okay, so you were 17 when this amendment passed, or this decision happened. And did anybody riot in the streets as a response to it? Did people freak out because suddenly gay people were allowed to get married? I don't remember that happening.
I remember I wrote a blog post urging Christians to continue to show love just like they were before, and just like not to turn hateful because the court ruled against our definition of marriage. I did that back then.
I think I commented on like one post, and I wasn't even actively doing. I wasn't on any social media. I think I commented on like a Yahoo post. I said, well, that means in protest, I'm just not going to get wedding gifts for anybody anymore. You know, it kind of as like a joke, because it's like, you know, this is like, you know, the Supreme Court, suddenly they think, oh, we're gonna just pretend that you know, people are gonna suddenly, you know, come out of the cocoon and say, oh, this is what marriage was like in our entire lives. I never agreed with it, but I didn't go out in the streets and scream, and I didn't say, you know, Anthony Kennedy should die like they did when he retired, which is, it's outrageous. Right. It's ridiculous. So, right. Alex, I know it's a little late. I know you said you were tired before, and we may be able to do a stream.
I want to read something on this topic, if that's quick. Something I read in a Washington Post article.
Yeah, you can have the last word.
Just a little excerpt. So this is from a Washington Post article about protesters at the Supreme Court, and she said, Sarah Schiaffo brought along her tiny daughter Lucy. Schiaffo said she was demonstrating because of the implications for American law during her child's lifetime. We need a Supreme Court justice that's going to uphold the values of our democracy, enforce our nation's laws that protect her health, the clean air, and the clean water she needs to thrive. There's so much at stake here, Schiaffo said. It's why we're here this morning. Being a DC kid, there's a lot to protest these days. Now, do you see the irony in this?
I kind of, like, I just heard like a lot of chatter. So, I mean, what was that about? Like she's protesting against him retiring?
No, it was a protest against Trump appointing a new justice. They don't want a judge that's going to uphold the Constitution. They want a judge that's going to enforce their clean air and clean water laws and will protect Obamacare. That's activism. And yeah, by the way, just a side note, with the Obamacare decision on the Supreme Court, they ruled that it was constitutional because they saw the individual mandate as a tax. Now that the individual mandate is gone, is it even constitutional?
Well, it's constitutional in that you know, they're able to levy. See that was the issue. Okay, so you know, and I'll close unless you want a final word after this. But
I wanted to see your thought on who should be a judge, actually, or have you followed that at all?
Well, so I'm not I wouldn't say that I'm a huge expert on that. So you know, I'll try to answer it after I reply in terms of Obamacare. So. Now, ironically, Obamacare is somewhat even more constitutional because the individual mandate was repealed. Because, because you're still, I mean, as stupid as it is, the government is allowed to, you know, basically take, you know, the government is allowed to give corporate welfare. You know, it doesn't mean that they should, but they're allowed to. But what you were saying is that, they defined it as a tax, which, you know, the government is allowed to pass taxes, but, you know, they were lying the whole time by saying, well, it's not a tax, it's you know, it's an individual mandate, you know, or what were they calling it at the time? Yeah, they were calling it the individual mandate, I think, the whole time. So, you know, it was basically, in order for it to be constitutional, they had to admit that it was a tax, which was contradicting all of their public statements. So essentially, you know, Obamacare, now that it doesn't have the individual mandate, is kind of funded just based on, you know, Congress allocating those funds anyway through the but by the way, I hope that next year they end up destroying the program altogether. I think that they have gotten rid of, and you know, I've kind of slipped in covering this, but the cost sharing reductions, which were ruled to be unconstitutional themselves, because it was basically the executive branch taking money without Congress approving it. So those are gone. So Obamacare as an institution is going to fall apart because, you know, in many cases, I think people are just going to stop buying it. So I think that they should repeal it. And, you know, hopefully in the next Congress, now that hopefully, you know, John McCain likely won't be around, or, you know, there's going to be a larger majority in the Senate, hopefully, and in the House, I think that they can get rid of Obamacare. I don't know if it's going to happen, but I'm willing to do my part. Talk about it. In terms of which Supreme Court justice should be selected, that Amy Coney Barrett. What's that?
Have you followed it at all?
I keep seeing these names, and they all, a lot of them seem to be from the Federalist Society. I have no problem with the people from the Federalist Society. I think it would be a little. You're asking too much for people to accept another Clarence Thomas or another Antonin Scalia, because I think that you do need a little balance on the Supreme Court. You shouldn't have an entire Supreme Court of Scalias and an entire Supreme Court of Ginsburgs. So, I think that this Coney Barrett, from what I've heard, is a legitimate candidate. I think what will happen if she's nominated is you'll see the same bullshit that happened. And I did see this, that they were questioning her Catholic beliefs. And it's like, we've had Catholic judges like a million fucking times. I don't care. It's like, or let's say if somebody was Greek Orthodox, would they ask him, oh, you're Greek? I'm not saying this because I know that you're not Greek Orthodox, but let's say if somebody was a Rastafarian, do you think that they would be questioned about their religious beliefs? And they're like, no, I'm a Rastafarian and I want to be on the Supreme Court.
It blew my mind when I saw Dianne Feinstein saying that stuff to her. Because if I were Amy Barrett at that point, I would have looked and I would have said, Senator Feinstein, I understand you're a Jew. Does that make you unqualified to represent the Constitution and defend it against enemies, foreign and domestic? Because you've been a Jew.
Alex? Hold on. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I lost you for a second.
Like, Dianne Feinstein is a Jew. That doesn't make her any less to be a senator, does it? I think Dianne Feinstein's views make her unqualified to be a senator, not her faith.
Right, and I think a lot of people hearing what you just said would say, "Oh, you're objecting, you're anti-Semite." I think you're correct, and I'm Jewish myself. I would say that, and Mad Dodge Productions, says hello, by the way, and so does Sean. Sean says hello, Alex. But
Hey.
I would say that a religious test, and Bernie Sanders did it too to her, and that I hate Bernie Sanders for things like this because he himself. There was a whole religious test by the DNC when he was, through WikiLeaks, we found out about that. So I would say that, this Coney Barrett or whoever is nominated, the question of religious faith is, I think, it's a low blow, especially if this is not supposed to be a person who is, going to be, nominated as political campaign director or something. This is a Supreme Court justice. So you don't judge them by things that they do. For example, if we had a gay Supreme Court justice, would you expect, somebody like Lindsey Graham or Marco Rubio to say, "Hey, did you take it up the butt" or something? It's ridiculous, and people would rightfully object to that, So I think we really have to judge these people on the basis of their merits. So the people that I've seen nominated, I don't know much about them. But, we could probably do a different feature on that once the nominee is made on Monday. So,
there are 4 guys being considered at this point, but I think Amy Barrett and Brett Kavanaugh are the top 2. Kavanaugh is he worked with George Bush and got appointed by George Bush to some court, I don't remember where. And he has a huge ally in Karl Rove, and the neocons are pushing him like crazy, like National Review, and anyone who attacks him is automatically attacked. I'm really kind of worried at the juggernaut they're creating with him, because I don't think he's nearly as pro-life as I would have liked, and he doesn't strike me as nearly as much of an originalist as Amy Barrett.
Excuse me.
Amy Barrett, on the other hand, clerked for Scalia, and that's huge. I feel like she would be more of another Scalia, more of an originalist. But this is also why I would like to see her now. The left is making up this huge movement about women and soccer moms and how they're going to dominate because women are all on their side. So you nominate a 45, 46-year-old woman who is a mom herself that's super conservative. That will destroy the narrative in one sense. And it'll be much harder for Lisa Murkowski or Susan Collins to oppose her. Because you can't really say you're anti-women's rights if you're a woman.
Well, I think you make a good point in terms of strategy, but I mean, remember what they did to Clarence Thomas. You know, then they call. I mean, they still call him an Uncle Tom and everything, even though he is to this day right now, like he's the only Supreme Court justice on the Supreme Court today. Of course, there was Thurgood Marshall before him,
But he was an activist judge.
What's that?
He was an activist judge. Thomas is an originalist.
Right, and you know, I think, you know, I like I said, I don't necessarily need the person to be the biggest originalist in the world, but I don't want somebody. I would say it's better to have an originalist than an activist judge. Some of these activist judges are really, you know, they look at themselves as the Grand Inquisitor, you know, that they're able to really, you know, they wield, you know, the gavel, and that's the way things are going to be. And, you know, I would say I respect originalists to a greater degree than I do activist judges.
Well,
because there has to be like a root to the ruling.
I hear Susan Collins going on TV and saying, I want a judge who will respect precedent. I want a judge who will not be an activist. And she voted for Sonia Sotomayor to be a judge. She's a Ginsburg 2.0. You just hear about Ginsburg more because she's been there longer. And it just blows my mind, like how she thinks that way. I think, though, if you nominate Amy Barrett, who, by the way, every Republican in 2017 voted to put on the Court of Appeals, along with Tim Kaine, Joe Donnelly, and Joe Manchin. Those were the three Democrats. If you nominate her, what I think will happen is Donnelly won't be able to vote against her. He's up for re-election in Indiana, and she's from Indiana. And he's also pro-life, so I don't see him voting against her. I also don't see Manchin voting against her. He would be stupid, too, because that would cost him the Senate seat, too. Trump is way too popular in West Virginia. So you've got two Democrats crossing over. And then I see Susan Collins joining with the Democrats and opposing her because for some reason, abortion, she loves abortion, and she even voted for the partial birth abortion, or she voted to kill the partial birth abortion act.
I think you raise, you know, a topic that, you know, I would have brought up myself a different time, but yeah, it's a good point. That in terms of pragmatism, a lot of these Democratic senators from you know, more red states, such as John Tester or that other retard over in North Dakota. Yeah. So yeah, what a fucking retard.
They're pro-choice though, and they have a base that's hugely pro-choice. Manchin and Donnelly aren't. That's why I say they'll cross.
Well, I think you know, Joe Donnelly, like you said, would probably have to do it. Then you have that other moron over in Missouri.
McCaskill.
Yeah, Claire McCaskill. Like, she's already not very popular. So the question is, and I think this really, we're going to see if Trump's real, you know, art of the deal and, you know, troll abilities are at work. He could probably squeeze some of these people into supporting it. And those that don't support it really have a lot to fear, because then they're going to be the target of massive campaigns of, you know, bad press and trolls. And you know, by the way, I mean, I don't care because, you know, screw Claire McCaskill. She doesn't stand for anything, you know, nothing. She's a retard. You know,
she is. She was really lucky to get a horrible opponent in 2012. That's why she won re-election.
Right. So we're talking about, you know, this Supreme Court seat is going to be a real case of brinksmanship during this fall. And I do hope that Trump, I mean, I hope he doesn't try to appoint somebody who's kind of an idiot. You know, some people were saying, Janine Perot. I was like, It's like, what?
Well, you know, Trump, politically speaking, even for him, if he nominates a moderate and they work with the Democrats to pick him, like, the Democrats will keep their seats because people will be happy that Trump got his nominee and those crossover voters will support it. But if Trump really wants to win in the midterms, he'll put a hardcore originalist like Amy Barrett, and then he's either going to have to force those people to vote for his nominee, so he'll win that way, or those people will vote against his nominee and they'll lose their jobs, and he'll be able to replace them with loyalists to his agenda.
No. That's. I mean, I think you're mixing it up. Amy Barrett, Amy Barrett is a good pick anyway, in that sense, because of the whole thing where the Democrats will vote. Because honestly, a lot of the people, in states like Kentucky or Missouri or whatever, they're not looking through this person's legal history or whatever. They'll probably hear some brief summary from a person who confirms their bias and whatever. And, then they'll decide, oh, I support this decision or I don't support this decision. Now, what Trump will do, and that's how he's able to persuade people, is he'll basically say, look, I am going to make the next nomination for the Supreme Court. And these bitches are holding her up, and let's assume it was Coney Barrett. Yeah. And they have no reason, and they're losers, and
he's going to tweet to all of them all the time until they change their mind.
Oh yeah, he's going to troll them really hard, and then let's say that they do vote for her. A lot of their basic, and it doesn't matter whether it's a moderate or not a moderate, because anybody that Trump nominates, they're going to basically portray as Red Skull from the Avengers or something. They don't care, because for them the truth doesn't matter. What matters is, Trump, it is Trump derangement syndrome. It's like literally that way. So essentially, he nominates a person, and then all he has to do is, kind of play whack-a-mole with all these senators. You'll have Manchin, who his support is probably shrinking at this point, and then you'll have Heitkamp and John Tester, and all those people are really going to have a very difficult time voting against this person, whoever it is.
Now, Tester will vote against him. Tester didn't even vote for Gorsuch. Heitkamp and McCaskill are the two he's trying to court, and Donnelly and Manchin.
Yeah, I'm hoping he does take down that John Tester guy, because he seems like a real.
Yeah. Well, he's going to a rally tomorrow in Montana to campaign for his opponent.
So Trump's going to Montana?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting.
Now, Tester, all the analysts have his race as like likely D or lean D. I think that's stupid. If their libertarian nominee doesn't screw this election up by pulling 5% of the vote like he did the last 2 times, Tester is done for. What happened, the Tester has never gotten 50% of the vote. The libertarian just pulls votes